If you are listening to and even enjoying this episode of the podcast and want to go deeper, I have a book recommendation for you. This is your host, Amanda, by the way, and the book is called The Age of Magical Overthinking, and I wrote it. I poured my heart into this book, and I really think you might like it. It's about delusion and obsession in the information age, and how the ways in which our minds naturally work are clashing with our current culture. Every chapter explores some confounding irrationality from contemporary society, including extreme cycles of celebrity worship and dethronement, mass embrace of Instagram manifestation gurus during times of crisis, and why our bodies sometimes enter literal fight or flight in response to something as objectively non-threatening as a curt email from a coworker. The book blends social science with pop culture analysis and personal stories. And if you prefer audiobooks, I recorded mine myself, so it's kind of like an extension of the podcast. Again, the book is called The Age of Magical Overthinking, Notes on Modern Irrationality, and it's available wherever books are sold. Your local indie bookstore, bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble, or even that one massive online book retailer run by a cult leader. You know the one. So if you enjoy this podcast, I really hope you'll consider checking out the book. Genuinely, for the longest time, I thought paying a literal fortune for my monthly data plan was just normal, until I found out about Mint Mobile and their premium wireless plans that start at just $15 a month. You can say bye-bye to your overpriced wireless plans, jaw-dropping monthly bills, and unexpected overages. Mint Mobile is here to the rescue. Ditch overpriced wireless and get 3 months of premium wireless service from Mint Mobile for $15 a month. Shop data plans at mintmobile.com/magical. That's mintmobile.com/magical. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5GB plan required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. There is nothing I thought spiral about quite like the prospect of having to find a new therapist. And that is why I am genuinely so glad that ZocDoc exists. And I'm not just talking about therapist appointments. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare all types of in-network doctors and click to instantly book an appointment. With more than 100,000 quality doctors across all kinds of specialties, you can find any type of provider from mental health to dental health, urgent care to primary care, and more. I've been using it for almost 7 years. Stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/magical to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/magical. ZocDoc.com/magical. Welcome to the Magical Overthinkers podcast, a show for thought spiralers, exploring the subjects we can't stop overthinking about, from gossip to laziness. If you ever get the feeling that there really seems to be something especially hard about existing as a human with a brain right now in the information age, then you're in the right place. This show is here to help us think less about the things that don't matter and more about the things that do, to quiet the cacophony in our brains for a while, or even hear a melody in it. I'm your host, Amanda Montell. Today, we're overthinking about misinformation. Today, we have a very special sort of episode in celebration of the 1-year anniversary of the publication of my book, The Age of Magical Overthinking, which inspired this podcast. I wanted to share a free excerpt from the audiobook, which addresses the topic of misinformation through the lens of a cognitive bias called the illusory truth effect, or our tendency to believe that something is true just because we've heard it multiple times. A bias that is so profound that even an awareness of it doesn't always help us curtail it. It's the power of repetition to make something seem true. And there was once a less psychologically complex time in human history when this bias helped us parse through information well enough. For example, if you heard from a ton of different people in your small hunter-gatherer community that it was dangerous to go near the woods at dusk, that would probably mean there was some truth to that sentiment. And even if there wasn't, even if it was misinformation or lore, a difference that is also explored in this chapter, well, it was better to play it safe and trust it anyway. The illusory truth effect had this survival benefit. But now, living in more informationally overwhelming times, illusory truth is no longer good enough all the time. And yet, science demonstrates that it is still incredibly powerful. Last year, I got to write a piece for The Guardian about misinformation and language in the digital age, called The Simple Trick That Can Sabotage Your Critical Thinking. And in this piece, as in the chapter, I quoted a memory scientist named Lisa Fazio, who noted that we are so primed to confuse a statement's familiarity with veracity that the bias persists even when listeners are warned to look out for it, even when they are explicitly told the source was untrustworthy. She told me that sometimes misinformation or false lore, rumors catch on, quote, not necessarily because we believe them to be true, but because they feel comfortable and are easy to understand. You know, when a piece of information just clicks in your brain, it just feels good to know, even if it isn't true? That's what she's talking about. In the past, as I mentioned, repetition was a decent clue that a statement was reliable. Fazio said to me, our brains pick up early on in development that these cues are associated with truth, but this can go wrong in situations with a lot of ambient misinformation like social media. So beyond repetition, what are some of the factors that make a piece of misinformation or lore feel true, feel good to know? Well, some include rhyme, humor, and a few others are explored in the chapter I'm sharing with you today. Fortunately, though, it doesn't only have to be sort of shameless disinformers who can exploit the power of the illusory truth effect. For those of us who care about real facts but don't always get it right, like myself, we can also remember that, as Fazio says, it's okay to repeat true information. People need reminders of what's true, such as, for example, that vaccines are safe and that climate change is driven by our actions. So if you can't stop overthinking about misinformation in the digital age, what we can do about it, then I hope you enjoy this chapter. As a reminder, misinformation and disinformation are different. Misinformation happens by accident, disinformation happens on purpose. These ideas can get a little bit tricky, especially in the digital age. But in the spirit of pursuing real facts, I'm also including in the show notes of this episode a couple of corrections for episodes of Magical Overthinkers. In this chapter, I share another kind of funny example of a piece of lore that I spread on my other show, Sounds Like a Cult, unintentionally because it sounded true enough. As a podcaster, it's easy to do. I care deeply about getting things right and also about sharing information that I find fascinating in a sparkly way. So if you enjoy this excerpt from the audiobook of The Age of Magical Overthinking, I hope you'll consider purchasing a copy, either on audio or in hardback. This book was absolutely a dream to write, and I'm so proud of it. So with that, here's the episode, a chapter titled, Haters Are My Motivators, a note on the illusory truth effect. Haters are my motivators. A note on the illusory truth effect. My relationship to truth changed forever because of a lie about wedding flowers. I was looking into the sinister history of marriage traditions for an episode of the cult-themed podcast I'd been hosting for a year and change. The cult of weddings was that week's subject of critique. I'd always harbored an intuitive contempt for the bridal industry's conformist liturgy and consumerism. The idea that blood diamonds, matching bridesmaids' frocks, demands of your loved one's unbridled obedience, and $20,000 in debt were all just part of the fun. I knew I wasn't alone in that feeling. I just needed some lurid evidentiary backup. Perusing sources from Brides Magazine to Reddit, I kept finding the same yarn spun again and again about the origins of the bridal bouquet. The much-repeated claim stated that because medieval peasants bathed so infrequently, only about once a year, brides learned to carry bunches of fragrant herbs down the aisle to mask their tangy stenches. The modern-day popularity of the June wedding, these articles stated, derives from the old-time tradition of enjoying your annual wash in late spring. I cherish a fun fact. Chancing upon a gold bullion of dinner table fodder makes me come alive. So while these reports of filthy feudal fiancés gave off their own odor, one of too good to be true urban legend,
They were repeated so consistently and offered such juicy entertainment value, I thought, what reason do I have not to pass them along? I performed a subconscious calculation, weighing the likelihood of these stories' veracity against the impact either way, and in the end I decided, yes, I shall repeat them on air. In my recounting, I hedged with words like, I guess, and I read that, but it didn't matter. The day the podcast episode aired, one listener giddily tweeted, LMAO, I just learned on a podcast that the reason brides carry bouquets is because in medieval Europe, they only bathed once a year. Thousands of reshares poured in. The factoid spread like a communicable disease. Patently less viral went the Twitter response from Dr. Eleanor Janega, a medieval historian at the London School of Economics. Janega heard the episode and chimed in that basically every piece of popular lore from the Middle Ages is a myth, including, unfortunately, this one. Just like today, bridal bouquets in the medieval period were made of flowers, arranged according to their color symbolism, not their perfume. 1,000 years ago, peasants may not have delighted in indoor plumbing or obsessive twice-daily showers, but they did plenty of grooming, often in communal bathhouses. Wash time was such a production in medieval Europe that some royals entertained guests with it, keen to show off their lavish bathing facilities and herbal elixirs. Charlemagne was known to invite fellow nobles over to join him for a rinse. Allegedly, he'd even welcome crowds of spectators to behold dozens of wealthy men literally bathing in the lap of luxury together. I don't know about you, but I find this story about 100 times more amusing than peasants not showering very much. Plus, it has the benefit of being true. I was not surprised to learn from Dr. Janega that the wedding origin stories I'd read and spread were the stuff of folktales. I was mildly horrified, however, at my own eagerness to share them, despite my better brain doubting their accuracy. I proceeded to contact Janega, hoping to gain some clarity on why so much mythology surrounds the Middle Ages. I was embarrassed to have to ask exactly which years were even in question here. Hadn't I learned this in high school? The 1,000-year period approximately considered medieval spans from the fall of Rome in 476 AD to Martin Luther's birth in 1483. We invent so much about the Middle Ages partially because it's the pond between ancient and modern times, Janega explained. Close enough in history to feel familiar, but long ago and far away enough to retain mystery, medieval Europe provides the perfect backdrop for both romanticization and nightmare, fairy princesses and torture chambers. Modernity has rendered us so magically overthoughtful that some have started glamorizing the quaint lives of Dark Age paupers. A much-circulated 2019 headline suggested the average American worker takes less vacation time than a medieval peasant. But where provincial PTO is concerned, Janega cleared the air. Quote, they might have had a couple extra days off work each month for religious holidays, but if you're a peasant, and almost everyone was, the cow still has to get milked, you still need to chop firewood and stoke the fire, and if it's harvest season, it doesn't matter if you get the day off. When you think of the Middle Ages, some picture a cottagecore fantasy, but it's all well and good until you're plowing a field with no tractor. Also, a staple of medieval torture museums is the Iron Maiden, a spiky metal cabinet, which was actually not a Dark Age device, but rather a bogus invention from the late 18th century. It isn't terribly difficult to fact-check a historical folktale. Why then, even with all the accessibility and collective power of the internet, do such falsehoods prevail? And why had I, ostensibly a proud hater of mistruths, perpetuated them? We can assign much of the blame to a bias known as the illusory truth effect, our penchant to trust a statement as factual simply because we've heard it multiple times. Characterized by the power of repetition to make something false sound true, the illusory truth effect has been demonstrated using a bevy of stimuli, from fake news headlines and marketing claims to rumors, trivia, and internet memes. The bias explains why, until I was 18 years old, I was genuinely certain that if you swallowed a piece of gum, it would take 7 years to digest. But it's also how political propaganda is able to spread so effortlessly, like an X-Acto knife slicing through wrapping paper. The illusory truth effect's influence can be as benign as believing medieval brides stink worse than they did, or as corrosive as the myth that people who use the welfare system are lazy. With illusory truth, entire legends and genres about individuals and societies are constructed, perpetuated, and believed without reserve. At worst, masters of the bias can become tyrants. Bringing age-old storytelling traditions, like repetition and rhyme, to a political stage, public figures can mass disseminate falsehoods on purpose, inflaming bigotry as a means of bolstering their own power. On the flip side, these language techniques infuse pleasure into learning real facts. They also encourage us to give information that's been corroborated by several sources more weight than random one-off anecdotes. Like all biases, the sword of illusory truth is double-edged.
You know what I detest almost as much as a bout of rumination? Sky-high, scammy wireless bills that cost a fortune for data. Genuinely, for the longest time, I thought paying a literal fortune for my monthly data plan was just normal, was just acceptable. That was until I found out about Mint Mobile and their premium wireless plans that start at just $15 a month. Indeed, you can say bye-bye to your overpriced wireless plans, jaw-dropping monthly bills, and unexpected overages. Mint Mobile is here to the rescue. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text, delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all your existing contacts. Ditch overpriced wireless and get 3 months of premium wireless service from Mint Mobile for $15 a month. Shop data plans at mintmobile.com/magical. That's mintmobile.com/magical. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5 GB plan required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. There is nothing I thought spiral about quite like the prospect of having to find a new therapist. I have been in that position at a few points in my life, and it is really overwhelming, not just because you have to find someone who's the right chemistry fit for you, but also because it can be stressful to find someone who takes your insurance, who meets other sort of qualifications that are really personal to you. And that is why I am genuinely so glad that ZocDoc exists. Thanks to ZocDoc, we finally have an easy and painless way to book new therapy appointments. And I'm not just talking about therapist appointments. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare all types of in-network doctors and click to instantly book an appointment. With more than 100,000 quality doctors across all kinds of specialties, you can find any type of provider from mental health to dental health, urgent care to primary care, and more. There are doctor reviews by verified patients. It really is such a sort of encouraging and soothing process to find a new doctor with ZocDoc. I've been using it for almost 7 years. Stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/magical to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/magical. ZocDoc.com/magical.
In 1993, Northwestern researchers Alice Eagley and Shelley Chaikin published a book titled The Psychology of Attitudes, in which they argued that when people lack the knowledge, literacy, or motivation to critically evaluate a message, they rely on simple heuristics like familiar sayings tend to be credible. It's the path of least resistance. If a nugget of information is easy to absorb, like smelly peasants are the reason bridal bouquets exist, it makes us want to believe it. Repetition is like a cognitive Tums, aiding in informational digestion. When you come across a sentiment twice and then 3 times, you start responding to it more quickly, your brain misinterpreting fluency as accuracy. Familiarity breeds comfort, but it also builds an immunity to unlearning and relearning, even in instances where you weren't that attached to the knowledge in the first place, like the fake origins of wedding flowers. To replace a previous thought with new information would mean admitting that what you thought before was wrong, said Dr. Moya McTeer, a science communicator and author of The Milky Way, an autobiography of our galaxy. According to McTeer, dismissing a claim gets trickier every time you encounter it in the wild. Swiftly, we build up a resistance to facts that contradict what we've grown cozily accustomed to. I am genuinely afraid of this, confessed McTeer, who told me she suffers a recurring nightmare, one that I sadly lived, about publicly spreading something she heard a few times, but that turned out to be hogwash. The trouble is that we don't sort the things we learn at confidence intervals. Instead, we treat everything filed away in our minds as equally true. As McTeer put it, my brain doesn't separate things that I'm very sure about and things that I'm less sure about. It just stores all my knowledge as knowledge. Even for trained scientists, when it comes to the day-to-day handling of information, processing fluency, whether or not something rings a bell, is our default strategy for evaluating truth. Only when that fails do we turn to actual thinking. We internalize the illusory relationship between repetition and accuracy early in life. Children as young as 5 are already associating the familiarity of a statement with reliability, and the habit doesn't wane in adulthood. Vanderbilt University memory scientist Lisa Fazio published a study in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, which found that college students fell prey to the illusory truth effect, even when a careful knowledge test later revealed they knew the correct answer. The bias is so potent, it persists even when listeners are specifically warned to look out for it. Fazio's study concluded that the effect occurred after listeners were explicitly told the source of a statement was dubious, when it was presented with qualifying language, when it was outright implausible, fish can breathe air, and when it obviously violated prior knowledge. Mercury is the largest planet in the solar system. The illusory truth effect bested listeners regardless of whether the time between repetitions was minutes, weeks, or months. At the risk of sounding dramatic, repetition very well might be the closest thing we have to a magical spell. In 2018, Yale psychologist Gord Pennycook ran a survey on illusory truth using fake news headlines from the 2016 US presidential campaign. He found that if participants across the political spectrum had seen a false, seemingly absurd headline just once before, it made them up to twice as likely to believe it. Headlines from the study included, "Mike Pence's marriage was saved by gay conversion therapy," "FBI agent suspected in Hillary email leaks found dead in apparent murder-suicide," and "Trump to ban all TV shows that promote gay activity starting with Empire as president." Take the gay TV headline. Pennycook noted that only about 5% of participants who had not seen the claim in a prior phase of the experiment thought it was true. But of the participants who had seen the headline previously, 10% assessed it as a fact, a perception that held up when they were tested a week later. A 5% increase might sound fairly low, but consider that Facebook and Google, the world's 2 biggest news distribution platforms, have featured questionable and even full-blown conspiratorial headlines in their trending news sections. When participants are in the millions and the study is real life, it's no wonder America's sense of truth has crumbled like medieval ruins. Before the advent of writing systems and the mass distribution of books, the only way to learn anything without experiencing it firsthand was through oral repetition. Memorable chants, songs, poems, legends, allegories, jokes. The average human might not have been beset by information overload, but being underinformed wasn't ideal either. For most of history, a community's elites, priests, royals, eventually the privileged scribes who were taught to read and write, guarded knowledge like precious ore. The clandestine nature of information gave these gatekeepers immense power, more than any individual holds today. Technology later democratized information, and the folkloric traditions people had been using to spread wisdom for millennia took on new forms. Pithy Instagram quotes were the new proverbs. Exaggerated headlines became our antique legends. I spoke with Butler University folklorist Dr. Tom Mould, who explained that a legend is defined by 3 core qualities. It's told as true, but clearly carries undertones of doubt. Its content is extremely difficult or impossible to confirm. And not unlike a superstition, it helps us capture and cope with culture-wide fears. Legends don't typically survive passage when they're immediately disprovable. Say, the claim that a certain harmless berry is actually deadly poisonous. Eat the berry and you'll know right away whether or not it'll kill you. But the lore that breaking a mirror yields a curse of bad sex is tougher to evaluate. To confirm if it takes 7 years to digest gum would require scalpels and scientists. And good luck verifying whether Trump had intentions to ban any TV show that promoted gay activity. Sure, we could Google our way to most answers, Experts like Eleanor Janega are easier than ever to access. But the illusory truth effect is so alluring, it often deters us from doing so. Instead, we pass on the legends. We retweet. We tell the world a story we know in our heart of hearts can't be true. Search engines may have made fact-finding easier, but language determines a fact's shareability. Using our species' favorite storytelling devices to make information more palatable can either be an educational gift or a sociopolitical weapon. Take proverbs. Historically, proverbs have offered snappy, common-sense answers to life's more cerebral mysteries. And for the ones that most people know, there's usually a corollary that presents a counter-perspective. For instance, the early bird gets the worm and strike while the iron is hot are inverses to better late than never and good things come to those who wait. Actions speak louder than words, contrasts the pen is mightier than the sword. I grew up hearing both teamwork makes the dream work and haters are my motivators. A few more contradicting aphorisms. Out of sight, out of mind versus absence makes the heart grow fonder. Birds of a feather flock together versus opposites attract. The golden rule versus nice guys finish last. And haste makes waste versus he who hesitates is lost. These inconsistencies are important because they suggest there are multiple worthy approaches to life. Things only start to get sinister when public authority figures, including politicians, religious leaders, and CEOs, but also sometimes memers and podcasters, use the recipe of a proverb to market a one-sided ideology that makes no room for antidotes. Dr. Sheila Bach, a folklorist at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, told me that society's most repeated proverbs, quote, are not necessarily the ones that are true, but are the ones that make good cultural sense. Tropes give speakers a framework to understand the world, and in times of stress, those tropes get more rigid. Consider America's welfare queen trope. In 2020, Tom Mould conducted a survey that examined the online social lore surrounding perceived moochers of government assistance. Mould asked his study participants to look at their social media feeds and note any memes that addressed wealth and social class. The majority of those surveyed were left-leaning college students, whose algorithms reflected their liberal politics. But even so, out of over 100 submitted memes, only 9 of them took up for the poor. Mould's study found that contemporary leftists were more than happy to call out white corporate welfare bros or working-class rural folks on farm subsidies, and that these commentaries were supposed to be progressive, as they subverted the stereotype that someone on welfare must be a single mother of color. The problem was that they weren't really doing anything to suggest that wasn't the case. All they were doing was adding new people to the definition of welfare queen, said Mould. He continued, we never got a sympathetic image of somebody who gets assistance from the government. Mould wondered if we have enough counter-proverbs to keep the self-made American dream narrative in check. They're surely out there, he told me. I just don't know that mainstream society has opened up the space to hear them. Repetition is just one of several linguistic tools that make regurgitating dubious hearsay irresistible. Studies have shown that people perceive information as more believable when presented in easy-to-read fonts and/or easy-to-understand speech styles. A crowd favorite is rhyme. In contemporary studies of the so-called rhyme as reason effect, researchers found that participants generally rate the phrase woes unite foes as more truthful than woes unite enemies and misfortunes unite foes, even though they all mean the same thing. In 1590, Shakespeare penned, was there ever any man thus beaten out of season, when in the why and the wherefore is neither rhyme nor reason? Using the rhyme as reason effect itself to note the conflation of artistry and accuracy. English raconteurs have long used rhyme to ingrain everyday wisdom in listeners' minds. Rhyme feels extra impactful in English, as opposed to Romance and Slavic languages like Italian or Russian, in which rhyme appears naturally all the time. English is full of inconsistent word pronunciations, spellings, and verb conjugations, which make rhyming trickier. The language's haphazard political and geographical histories resulted in a hodgepodge of Germanic, Romance, and Celtic. English has thus been called a linguistic pickpocket, rummaging through the purses of nearby tongues for useful vocabulary. This disorderliness does not lend itself particularly well to organic rhyme. So, what might seem like a corny literary device in French or Greek feels special and satisfying to an English ear. I have often wondered if the English language's chaotic origins inspire a sort of underlying chaos in its speakers.
So, this might be an overshare, but I'm trying not to overthink it. My underwear game was not strong until very recently. It was a sad little collection of under things, and then I discovered the Skims Fits Everybody collection. Y'all, I'm not kidding. I don't think I had worn an underwire bra since middle school, and I don't like to think about that time. But I tell you, the Skims Fits Everybody t-shirt bra is so comfortable and so becoming on the human frame that I wasn't even triggered to think about those middle school years. I am now a bra wearer because these products are just so good. And if you yourself have ever struggled with your bra game, I beseech you to consider Skims. And it's not just their t-shirt bra, they also have bralettes. Oh, their triangle bralette. I have it in this beautiful sagey bluish green shade, and it's a delight to adorn my torso in it every single time. I would also be absolutely remiss not to mention their underwear. Comfortable, seamless, grown up. I feel poised and polished when I wear it. Shop Skims Fits Everybody collection at skims.com and Skims New York flagship on Fifth Ave. After you place your order, be sure to let them know I sent you. Select podcast in the survey and be sure to select my show in the drop-down menu that follows.
When I was little, my camp counselor taught me the phrase, "Leaves of three, let it be," so I'd remember what poison ivy looked like and avoid it. In college, I quickly learned beer before liquor, you'll never be sicker. Liquor before beer, you're in the clear. Though that tidbit turned out to be demonstrably less reliable. Our brains privilege rhyme in part because it makes language more predictable. In practically every context, unpredictability is disconcerting, so the mind naturally does whatever it can to avoid it. When we encounter a rhyming phrase, we automatically break down the words into sound units called phonemes. This process is called acoustic encoding, and it's the first step in deciphering any word. With rhyme, the comely sound structure creates a kind of blueprint, a pattern, that seems to make the message itself more sensible. Rhyming purifies the basics of our highly complicated world, Harvard psycholinguist Dr. Steven Pinker once said. It brings order to the informational chaos out there. Needless to say, we find this pleasurable. The same way we enjoy stripes and plaids or a well-arranged kitchen pantry, we are fond of linguistic organization. As Stanford psychologist Barbara Tversky observed, when thought overwhelms the mind puts it into the world, notably in diagrams and gestures. The key to memory is finding a nice little place for every thought. And if a statement isn't meaningful enough to feel orderly and thus memorable all on its own, forcing a pattern onto it, like rhyme, will do the trick. Think of catchy political slogans. The Cold War began 40 years before I was born, but I know the phrase "better dead than red" as well as I know "1, 2, buckle my shoe." Unassumingly, rhyme alone works to turn heavy political philosophies into adorable taglines. Like a linguistic halo effect, when an utterance is more attractive, we also take it to be more trustworthy. This is why the rhyme as reason rule has also been labeled the Keats heuristic, referencing the poet John Keats's famed declaration, "Beauty is truth, truth, beauty." Truth, however, is not always the most important goal in storytelling. Instead, it might be to reinforce cultural ideals, demonstrate you're part of an in-group, test social norms, provoke laughter or disgust, or laughter and disgust. As a genre, jokes do so much more than incite amusement. They allow a speaker to wade through sensitive topics within the safe bounds of plausible deniability. When a joke causes offense, the teller can respond, "I was kidding," and then use that grace to evaluate whether or not the joke really did reflect some internalized prejudice, all without having to admit to a blunder in public. Sometimes, jokes are so clever at camouflaging problematic messaging that tellers themselves don't realize what they've said contradicts their own beliefs. Tom Mould confessed to repeating an old joke about a wealthy woman who brought back a stray dog from a vacation in Mexico, only for the vet to tell her it was actually a large rodent. Mould didn't realize until a friend pointed it out that the joke was xenophobic. Research finds that laughter and disgust are among the emotional responses most likely to make a piece of information both persuasive and shareable. The others include fear, frustration, and surprise. Laughter and disgust, the exact two reactions my medieval bath story elicited. I learned from the work of Hunter College psychology professor Tracy Dennis Tewari one more reason why so much mythology surrounds the Middle Ages. It was the dawn of modern-day anxiety. In her book, Future Tense, Why Anxiety is Good for You Even Though It Feels Bad, Dennis Tewari noted that in medieval Europe, where minds were chained to the Catholic Church and the threat of eternal damnation loomed large, people got used to a certain type of anguish. But starting in the 1500s, as feudalism dissipated and the scientific revolution emerged, ideas of agency and selfhood encouraged people to question old ways, to piece together reality's laws and envision a future of possibilities. Psychological troubles then morphed. The motto of the Enlightenment was sapere aude, meaning dare to know. But Dennis Tewari wrote that this new science-empowered mind that dared to know was also, quote, a vulnerable mind, robbed of the medieval certainty of faith. Budding ideas of self-creation clashed with life's erratic zigzags, and this discord cracked open a geyser of untapped anxiety. Generations would later call it existential angst, Dennis Tewari said. This post-Enlightenment combination of knowledge, angst, and popular sovereignty inspired the West to approach life with a certain style of attack, to conquer both territories and ideas. Ever since, we've carried this bullish attitude toward information with us. During election seasons and other moments of cultural uproar, I find it especially vital to remember that political dogmas become dogmas expressly because they are repeated with fervor. When a politician or pundit starts to sound more like a commercial jingle or broken record than a scholar, that's a cue to listen more closely, to bear in mind that knowledge isn't always meant to go down like a nursery rhyme. The more I think about the illusory truth effect, the more I think it doesn't work solely on external information, but also on the internal stories we tell ourselves about who we are. I have a personal habit of narrativizing my life so aggressively that it sometimes prevents me from sincerely experiencing it, because I discard any plot points that don't feel on brand for the genre or trope of my character. My favorite podcast, Radiolab, has a riveting episode called A World Without Words, in which neuroscientist Jill Bolte Taylor is interviewed about her best-selling memoir, My Stroke of Insight. The book details the story of a massive stroke Taylor suffered at age 37, compromising the language centers of her brain. Temporarily, she lost her ability to articulate any thoughts or feelings. At first, losing words sounded like my own customized version of hell. But Taylor said what it actually made her feel was a sense of euphoria, an almost psychedelic oneness with her surroundings. That's because for a few weeks, the mental doctrine she'd been using to self-narrate her life, her archetype, the Freytag's pyramid of her successes and failures, fell away. Ephemerally, she was a blank slate of pure experience. No repetition, no rhyme, no illusory reason. I have spent my life bedeviled by the tug-of-war between awe and objectivity, beauty and truth. How do we hold both at the same time? This fascination informs the ways I like to learn. My favorite teachers have always been those who were able to paint complex, left-brained ideas with a mythological brush. The late astronomer Carl Sagan was a master of chiseling vivid allegories out of scientific theories. Quote, "We're made of star stuff. If you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe." Moya McTeer's work lives precisely at the intersection of physics and folklore. McTeer was raised in the 1990s and early 2000s in Pennsylvania's dense woods, in a cabin with no electricity or running water, just her imagination and a clear view of the stars. McTeer went on to become the first Harvard graduate in history to double major in astrophysics and mythology, as well as the first Black woman to earn a PhD in astronomy from Columbia University. I think my study of folklore has given me a flexibility where I understand that there are different epistemologies, she told me. There are different foundations of truth that you can operate on at different times. When McTeer is hired to give a public science lecture or consult on a film where the writers want to ensure a physics plot point makes sense, she acknowledges that sometimes hard, fixed data is not the most effective way to communicate. Sometimes people need something more empathetic or more abstract, she said. Tom Mould explained that while memorable phrasing might not make information more accurate, it does make it more powerful because of how transportable language is. They say stories transport people into the story world, but also narratives are incredibly transportable themselves, he said. You can easily tote along catchy proverbs like woes unite foes or haters are my motivators and use them in all kinds of situations, like a semantic Swiss Army knife. Stories work the same way. You can rip a story out of its context and retell it in other places, said Mould. You can't do this with stats, graphs, and charts, forms of data often helmed as universally superior. It's hard to remember a graph, Mould continued. But what if I told you about an experiment in the form of a story? Mistaking an anecdote for an objective fact is dubious, but using a story to breathe life into an objective fact is nothing short of magic. Different scientific fields use the language of mythology to convey their concepts all the time. In her biochemistry research, my mother conceived the term anastasis, Greek for resurrection, to describe cells recovering from the brink of death. I'm fond as well of the term Goldilocks zone, astronomy's nickname for the planetary temperature conditions conducive to life. Both dazzling and thoroughly true, Earth finds itself smack dab in the middle of our solar system's Goldilocks zone. Before her untimely passing in 1999, from the same lymphoma my mom later had, astronomer Rebecca Elson published a poetry collection called A Responsibility to Awe, which contains a collage of spectacular science symbolism made even more gorgeous by its accuracy. Quote, "If the ocean is like the universe, then the waves are stars. We astronomers are nomads. All the earth our tent."
Thank you all so much for tuning into this special excerpt of the Age of Magical Overthinking. Now is the point in the episode where I share a nugget of evidence-based advice for how we overthinkers can get out of our own heads this week. This one comes from a Psychology Today piece titled The 90-Second Rule That Builds Self-Control. And it quotes a Harvard-trained neuroscientist, Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, who wrote a great book some might be familiar with called My Stroke of Insight. Dr. Taylor says, quote, "When a person has a reaction to something in their environment, there's a 90-second chemical process that happens," unquote. Beyond that 90 seconds, there's actually an opportunity to interrupt the emotional loop that might result from that initial unpleasant stimulus. 90 seconds, says this article, is all it takes to identify an emotion and allow it to dissipate while you simply notice it. So when you're stressed, pausing for 90 seconds and labeling what you're feeling. For example, I'm getting angry, or I'm feeling triggered, abandoned, lonely, and sad, tamps down activity in the amygdala to help prevent you from getting caught in an emotional loop. Well, with that, thank you again so much for listening. I'll be back with a new thought spiral in a couple of weeks. And in the meantime, remember, think it over, just don't overthink it. Magical Overthinkers was created and hosted by Amanda Montell and edited by Jordan Moore of The Pod Cabin. Our theme music is by Casey Kolb. Thank you to our magical manager, Katie Epperson, coordinator, Reese Oliver, and Network Studio 71. Be sure to follow the pod on Instagram at Magical Overthinkers. We're also on YouTube, link in show notes, and ad-free episodes as well as behind-the-scenes extras are available on the Magical Overthinkers Substack at amandamontell.substack.com. This might be an overshare, but I'm trying not to overthink it. My underwear game was not strong until very recently, and then I discovered the Skims Fits Everybody collection. The Skims Fits Everybody t-shirt bra is so comfortable and so becoming on the human frame. They also have bralettes. They're triangle bralette. I have it in this beautiful sagey bluish green shade, and it's a delight. I would also be absolutely remiss not to mention their underwear. Comfortable, seamless. Shop Skims Fits Everybody collection at skims.com and Skims New York flagship on Fifth Ave. After you place your order, be sure to let them know I sent you. Select podcast in the survey and be sure to select my show in the drop-down menu that follows.